Every civilization tells stories of freedom, but very few are honest about the price it demands. In the 19th century, when the United States called itself the land of liberty, millions lived in chains. And among those millions, one man refused to accept the lie. His name was Frederick Douglass, and his life would become one of the greatest proofs in human history that even in bondage, the human spirit remains unbreakable. The child who was never a child, he was born into slavery around 1818 in Maryland. No birth certificate, no family record, not even certainty of his own age. Think about that. A system so cruel, it erased your very beginning. That was America's promise to Frederick Douglass: forget who you are and serve. But something inside him, call it reason, call it rebellion, call it the spark of humanity, refused. He saw other children play freely while he stood in chains. He saw his mother walk miles at night just to see him asleep for a few minutes before dawn took her back to the fields. He saw the whip cut through skin, and he began to wonder who gave one man the right to own another. That question, whispered in the heart of a slave child, was the beginning of a revolution. The power of words every empire controls by controlling knowledge. Plantation owners knew that an educated slave was a dangerous slave, so they outlawed literacy. But Douglass, still a boy, found his first battlefield in the alphabet. He traded food with poor white boys for scraps of lessons. He read whatever papers he could steal. And the more he learned, the more he realized that the path from slavery to freedom was not made of chains broken by muscle, but of ideas broken by truth. He later wrote, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." He was right, because literacy became his rebellion, every letter a weapon, every word a declaration. That's not just education. That's emancipation of the mind. The fight for self, but knowledge alone could not end the lash. So Douglass fought, literally. At 16, he was sent to Edward Covey, the slave breaker. Covey's job was to destroy his will. Beatings, starvation, humiliation, all designed to teach submission. But one morning, Frederick Douglass fought back. For 2 hours, they struggled in the dust. Covey whipped him, and Douglass caught the whip. He fought until Covey, the feared torturer, backed away in defeat. From that day, Douglass wrote, "I was a slave in form only. The day I resisted, I was a free man." That moment wasn't just physical defiance. It was psychological rebirth. The enslaved boy had found the man within him, and the world would never chain him again. The escape was not an act of desperation. It was an act of destiny. Douglass disguised himself as a sailor, borrowed identification papers, and boarded a train heading north. Every stop was a risk of discovery, every face a potential betrayer, but destiny, once awakened, does not turn back. He crossed into New York and into freedom. He later said the feeling was both joyous and painful. Because freedom gained for one is still haunted by the memory of those left behind. That paradox would define the rest of his life. The man who escaped slavery could not escape the duty to destroy it. The birth of a voice. In 1841, Frederick Douglass stepped onto a public stage for the first time. He was nervous. His hands trembled. The audience, mostly white abolitionists, did not expect much from a former slave. But then he began to speak, and something happened. His voice carried not just words, but centuries of suffering refined into intellect. He spoke with the precision of a scholar, and the rhythm of a preacher, and the moral fury of a prophet. He told them about the crack of the whip, the sale of mothers, the theft of childhood. He forced America to look into a mirror it had long avoided. That night, the audience rose in silence, not out of pity, but out of awe. The man who had once been property had become the conscience of a nation. The rise of the abolitionist. From that moment, Frederick Douglass became unstoppable. He joined the abolitionist circuit, touring across the North, Britain, and Ireland. His eloquence dismantled every stereotype that slavery depended upon. When racists claimed black people were inferior, he answered with intellect that outshone senators. When ministers quoted scripture to justify slavery, he quoted scripture to condemn it. When politicians said patience was a virtue, he replied, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." Each speech was fire, measured, articulate, unrelenting. He did not beg for freedom, he demanded it. And more than that, he demanded America live up to its own creed. He thundered, "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" That question pierced through the celebration of liberty like lightning through a flag. The global stage Europe listened to. In Britain, he was welcomed not as a curiosity, but as a statesman. There, he saw how hypocrisy was not confined to one nation. It was global. He spoke before thousands, raising funds to legally purchase his freedom from his former owner. Imagine that irony, a man buying his own body back with the power of his words. From then on, he carried himself not as an ex-slave, but as an ambassador of humanity. History, when viewed from afar, looks inevitable, but in the moment, it is chaos, fear, and choice. By the 1850s, America stood on the brink of moral implosion. The country that called itself the land of the free was splitting under the weight of its own contradictions. The plantation South clung to its empire of cotton and cruelty. The industrial North claimed moral superiority, yet profited from the same system. In that moral fog, Frederick Douglass became the clearest voice in the nation. The prophet before the storm, Douglass saw the storm coming before anyone else. He warned that no country could survive half free and half slave. He told audiences that the issue was not one of politics, but of the human soul. He said, "Where justice is denied, where ignorance prevails, neither persons nor property will be safe." That wasn't prophecy. That was diagnosis. He understood that slavery wasn't just a southern disease. It was a national infection. And unless America faced it, it would destroy itself from within. a meeting with destiny. Lincoln, when war finally came, Frederick Douglass didn't retreat into words. He went to the front lines of ideas. He met with President Abraham Lincoln, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. Imagine that scene, the former slave, once hunted like an animal, now standing face to face with the most powerful man in the world. Their first meeting was tense. Lincoln was cautious, pragmatic. Douglass was direct, uncompromising. He urged Lincoln to make the war not just for union, but for freedom. He said the blood being shed would mean nothing if the chains remained. And slowly, painfully, Lincoln listened. It was Douglass who pushed for the enlistment of black soldiers. It was Douglass who reminded Lincoln that a nation fighting for liberty must act like it. And when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, Douglass saw it not as a gift, but as a beginning. He said, "The white man's liberty is no greater than the black man's." That single sentence condensed the entire moral evolution of America into one truth. Freedom cannot be selective. The war within the war, the Civil War, was not only fought on battlefields. It was fought in speeches, newspapers, and pulpits. And Douglass waged that invisible war with relentless precision. He traveled city to city, rallying support, organizing black recruitment drives, shaming complacency wherever he found it. He was called a radical, a fanatic, a dangerous man. But the truth is, he was the mirror America needed. Because he didn't just challenge slaveholders, he challenged hypocrites. He turned the moral weapon of Christianity against those who had twisted it. He thundered, "Between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference." That line didn't just shake churches, it shattered their comfort. Freedom, at last, and the aftermath, the war ended. The South lay in ruins. The Emancipation Proclamation had been fulfilled in blood. For the first time in American history, millions of black men and women walked free. But Douglass knew freedom without structure becomes chaos. Freedom without opportunity becomes mockery. He warned that emancipation was only the first chapter. He said, "Slavery is not abolished until the black man has the ballot." Because he saw that laws could change overnight, but minds, hearts, and institutions would resist for generations. That's the tragedy of progress. The body is freed long before the soul of a nation learns what that means. The betrayal of Reconstruction. The years that followed proved him right. Reconstruction began with promises and ended with betrayal. The South reinvented slavery through terror, segregation, and law. The North looked away, and once again, Douglass became the conscience America wanted to silence. He stood before crowds that had once cheered him and said, "Freedom now seems to mean freedom to oppress, freedom to insult, freedom to degrade." He would not soften his message. He knew that the cost of truth is loneliness, but he also knew that silence is the death of justice. So he spoke louder. The War of Memory, by the late 1800s, a new battle emerged, the battle over history itself. The South began to rewrite its past, dressing its crimes in words like heritage and tradition. The North began to romanticize reconciliation, not justice. Douglass saw it clearly. He said, "We are sometimes asked to forget the past, but this we cannot do, and this we ought not do." He understood something profound, that nations rot not from the memory of their sins, but from the denial of them. To forget is to repeat. To sanitize is to sanctify evil. To remember is to heal. And Douglass, ever the teacher, refused to let America forget. The mentor of a generation, in his later years, he became more than a reformer. He became a sage. He mentored younger black leaders, Ida B., Wells, Booker T. Washington, and countless others. He told them that freedom was not a single act, but a continuous struggle. That oppression evolves, and so must resistance. He said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." Those words echo across time in movements, protests, and revolutions far beyond his century. He had seen whips and wars, presidents and assassinations, victory and regression. And through it all, he never lost faith in the capacity of truth to prevail. That was Frederick Douglass, a man who turned the scars on his back into a map for humanity. History is not just the story of what people did. It's the story of what people refused to accept. And Frederick Douglass was a master of refusal. He refused silence. He refused submission. He refused to let the powerful define morality. That refusal was his revolution. The philosophy of defiance, to understand Douglass, is to understand the anatomy of resistance. He was born into a system that taught him his voice didn't matter, and he made that voice his weapon. That's not just courage, that's transformation. When he escaped slavery, he didn't just free his body, he freed his mind from the lie that one human being could own another. He said, "Knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave." That's one of the most revolutionary sentences ever spoken, because it implies that the first step to liberation isn't rebellion, it's awareness. Freedom starts when you start to question. And once you see the chains, you can never unsee them. That's why slaveholders feared education, not escape. Because an educated slave becomes a dangerous thinker, and dangerous thinkers become leaders. Douglass proved that the mind, once awakened, cannot be shackled again. The mirror of modern times, now let's zoom out, the way I, David Christian, love to. Let's look at the arc of the species. The story of Frederick Douglass is not just a story about race or America. It's the universal story of evolution itself. Every civilization, every epoch, every human journey moves from ignorance to awareness, from domination to equality, from silence to speech. It's the same pattern repeated across empires and ages. And that's what makes Douglass not just an American figure, but a cosmic one. Because what he fought for wasn't merely social justice. He fought for the moral advancement of the human condition. In him, Biology met philosophy. Evolution met ethics. Matter learned to speak. And what it said was, I am free. The paradox of progress. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Progress never comes clean. It drags behind it the debris of what it destroys. Every great leap forward is haunted by the ghosts of resistance. Douglass knew this. He warned that every generation must fight its own version of slavery, not of chains and whips, but of ignorance, apathy, and fear. He said, "The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." That line isn't about the past, it's about now. Because every society today, from America to Africa to Asia, still negotiates who gets to speak, who gets to matter, who gets to be seen as fully human. And if we fail to challenge those hierarchies, then history doesn't repeat. We do. The future he dreamed of, Douglass lived long enough to see the dawn of a new century. He died in 1895, but his shadow stretched into the future. He knew the battle wasn't over. He said, I am dying, but the cause lives. That cause, the cause of human dignity, is not confined to one color or country. It's a universal project. Every protest that demands equality, every movement that says, I am human too, is part of his afterlife. His voice lives in Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream, in Nelson Mandela's courage, in Malala Yousafzai's defiance, in every child who refuses to accept less than their worth. That's the immortality of conviction. The man who made America look in the mirror. Let's be brutally honest. Frederick Douglass didn't save America. He forced America to save itself. He wasn't polite about it. He wasn't patient about it. He was righteous, relentless, and utterly unafraid of offending power. Because truth isn't supposed to make you comfortable. It's supposed to make you conscious. Douglass knew that nations, like people, only grow when they face the ugliness within them. And he made America look directly into that mirror. That's not just leadership, that's moral surgery. Standing ovation moment. So tonight, if Frederick Douglass could stand before us, he would not say, look how far we've come. He'd say, look how far we still have to go. He'd remind us that freedom is not inherited. It's earned, protected, renewed. That silence is complicity. That dignity has no color. That truth is not negotiable. And he'd say, once you learn to read, you will be forever free. Because liberation doesn't start in the streets. It starts in the mind. That is the legacy of Frederick Douglass, a man born in bondage who taught the world that freedom is not a gift. It's a birthright. He turned pain into purpose. He turned rage into revolution. He turned America's shame into its conscience. And his voice still whispers through time, challenging us, daring us, awakening us. Agitate, agitate, agitate. Because the day we stop questioning is the day we stop evolving.